Hi, everyone. Teachers seeking to obtain supplies, lesson plans, projects, and other equipment for their classroom are often faced with challenges, not the least of which are challenges stemming from budgets. Increasingly, teachers are turning to outside support for their innovative ideas, but that's also a challenge. How can teachers navigate fundraising on top of their daily workloads? Today, we'll be talking about a platform that is assisting teachers in these efforts, as well as data from that platform showing what types of things teachers are asking for. That will be our topic on today's Teaching Matters.
Welcome to Teaching Matters, a podcast exploring all things teaching and learning. Teaching Matters is produced by NPR affiliate WOUB Public Media in Athens, Ohio. And here is your host, Dr. Scott Titsworth, Dean of the Scripps College of Communications at Ohio University.
Thanks so much, Trinity. Alix Guerrier is the CEO of DonorsChoose. DonorsChoose is a nonprofit platform that allows public school teachers to request funding for their classroom projects, supplies, and other experiences. DonorsChoose recently celebrated 25 years of impact, helping teachers, and Alix himself is a former math educator turned edtech entrepreneur and an experienced executive leader with over 20 years of experience in the education space. Alix, it's great to meet you. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Oh, Scott, it is such a pleasure to join you. And can I please have you just follow me around and introduce both DonorsChoose and me in every single venue? Because you did a perfect job, honestly.
Oh, it's great. I mentioned before we started recording that I knew a lot about DonorsChoose before you were even brought into my world, to be a guest on the podcast, because my daughter is a teacher and has used your platform as well as many of her friends. And so it's something I knew a lot about already. And so it's exciting to meet, one of the people behind that.
Well, so let me say thank you. First of all, thanks to your daughter for the work that she's doing. It's, our mission to support classroom educators like her. So I'm glad that, if we've been a help to her, then that makes us very, very happy. And thank you for being a supporter.
Absolutely. So let's start by learning a little bit more about you. I learned when I was doing research on you that you grew up in New Haven, Connecticut.
I did.
Talk a little bit about your background and sort of what, from that background, what led you to become interested in being in the education space like you are now?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do so. I did grow up in New Haven, Connecticut. Was actually born in New York, but moved to New Haven before starting school. So my full K-12 experience, and actually also pre-K, was in New Haven Public Schools. And we moved there as a family. I'm a first-generation American. Both of my parents are immigrants from two different countries. My dad is from Haiti, and my mom is from Brazil. It's an interesting story how they met and then ended up moving to New York, and starting a family and then raising that family in New Haven. One element of that is that for the early part of my life, I was really in a Haitian community in New York, in Queens. And even though my mom is from Brazil, she actually is fluent in Haitian Creole. That's part of her genius. So many things that I appreciate about my mom. And so, in fact, Haitian Creole was my first language. And I mention that because that's part of the story of my own education, because my first day of school, I didn't speak English. It's interesting. Obviously, I speak English now. But I remember that. I remember, that journey of kind of figuring out how to communicate in school. And throughout school, I think it's fair to call me a big nerd. I love science. I love math. I became a math teacher. And so I have a lot of really great memories of my academic journey through New Haven Public Schools. And I also remember a fair number of challenges. And I think even leaders within New Haven, and actually I talk to folks now, from my role here, acknowledge there are a lot of challenges that New Haven and a lot of other places, whether urban and rural that we were talking about, are facing. Educators doing their best, but with really limited resources. And I think in the introduction, you even gave some indication about that. I would say that it was pretty obvious to me as a kid, and it started to become even more apparent that we were operating under constraints. I mean, I can say that now. I wouldn't have used the language as a ninth grader or as a 10th grader, but I remember the feeling of frustration. In fact, that is a big part of why I really started to focus in on, well, first I volunteered in a sort of after school program as a college kid, but then ended up going to the classroom to become a teacher because of that experience that I had with those constraints.
Mm-hmm. The constraints are interesting because I think now, as I think about it, especially looking at the world through my daughter's eyes, going into the classroom relatively recently, we think about the budget constraints as being a recent phenomenon. But as I think back, when I was an elementary school student in the 1970s and 1980s, I remember getting the list of supplies that you had to bring to school at the beginning of every school year, mostly that you would use, but some of that was also going to the teacher just to be able to do projects throughout the year.
Yeah, that's right. And so, I mean, for a long time, many decades, it's really been a part of our just accepted reality that teachers, that schools do bake sales and fundraisers, of course, but that also that teachers spend a fair amount out of pocket. And I'm guessing that this may be something that you are familiar with and that your daughter is familiar with. A fair amount out of pocket. It's actually, if you step back and look at it, I think from a more objective perspective and compare it with other professions, like critical professions that are developing the next generation of Americans and leaders, professions that require specialized training, it's not too many other jobs where you get your college degree, you have this really important responsibility, one of the most critical responsibilities in society, and then you're put in pretty much an empty room and said, all right, go out of pocket. You haven't even received your first paycheck yet, but go out and figure out, go to Staples and get what you need to make this work. That's not how most jobs work, but it actually is the expectation in classrooms.
Yeah, it is. I think most listeners will be somewhat familiar with DonorsChoose, but as you look at the evolution of the platform, you took the helm in 2022, right?
Yeah.
What surprised you about sort of the community that has been formed with DonorsChoose? I mean, it's a platform, it's a crowdsourcing tool that teachers can use, but when you get onto it and you start, reading some of the projects, it's clear that there's more than just people putting projects up. There is community learning that takes place.
Yeah, that's right. That's a really great question. And, as you indicated, I've been in the education sector really for my career. So, of course, I also knew about DonorsChoose even, going back. Not quite when I was a teacher, because our founder, Charles, was in the classroom at the same time as me and started while I was still in the classroom. Hadn't gotten to California where I was teaching by the time I went on to grad school. But I did know him, and I got to know the platform, was a big fan of it. But it actually was not until I joined the team and really got a chance to peek behind the curtain that I had a chance to understand the scale that the organization had reached. And this is credit to the team that was here when I got here and our founder, whom I succeeded, reaching almost every public school. And I mean that literally. Like right now we're at, we do keep track of this, and we've served about 90% of American public schools, inching towards 100. And so it wasn't until I came in that I had a chance to understand and think about what that scale meant. And what started as this crowdfunding experiment, back when crowdfunding was brand new, right?
Yeah.
DonorsChoose was started in 2000. And so, now we're obviously very used to this, and there are lots of different platforms that allow this kind of functionality, but it was a real innovation at the time, and it started in one school at the Bronx. But now we are not only serving pretty much every school district and every zip code, almost every school, but also the scope of the needs have changed. And, it started out as a place where Charles is, our founder's fellow teachers could get books. But now teachers are also using the platform for all kinds of different needs. One of the privileges of my current role is that I have a chance pretty often to go visit a school And when a school is making a high level of use, actually, I was just at a school in New York yesterday that's really doing a lot. It almost becomes transformative. Like it's not just, oh, this teacher got this one need met, but now groups of teachers, and I think this is part of what your question is asking, groups of teachers are enabled to do all kinds of new things. So, I learned about something new yesterday. I learned that there is a sport called drone soccer. Okay. And if you look at it, it kind of looks like Quidditch from Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Except instead of kids flying around, it's like drones flying around in 3 dimensions, up, down, sideways, sort of blocking each other, knocking each other out of the way and trying to score points. I had never heard of it until yesterday. But yesterday I was in a high school in New York, and in part, thanks to DonorsChoose, there's a whole set of teachers and kids who are building these drones, programming them, practicing them, getting all the equipment to set this up, and competing actually on a national level. And so that's the kind of thing that starts to become enabled when you provide teachers with what they need to really achieve their aspirations for their kids.
Mm-hmm. Locally here in Athens, one of the things that a group of teachers, and I don't know that they have actually put projects onto DonorsChoose yet. I suspect that will happen quickly, but they're very into place-based learning. And in rural Southeast Ohio where I live, there's a history of corporate extraction. So there was mining that went on in the early 1900s. There was logging that went on, where literally resources were extracted from the region, left very little behind except poverty in some cases, in many cases. But very rich history, very interesting learning opportunities about how that sort of extraction impacts the environment and then how you mitigate that, 100 years later. Yeah. So place-based learning, is a type of thing that I think fits very well with what you're describing in terms of this.
Yeah, it does. And I'm guessing, I'm learning about this from you just as you describe it, but I can start to put together the picture. It probably started with a teacher or a group of teachers sort of having a creative idea about a way to incorporate their locality and issues and questions that are relevant to that community that their kids have probably noticed or know something about, use that as a hook to engage the students. It's immediately relevant because it has to do with that community, and then are building a learning experience around that. That's what teachers are trying to do every day, look for ways to connect and build in the skills and the content that they want their kids to develop, but, in the context of something that's interesting and fun and joyous and relevant. And often it takes, you have this creative idea and then you realize, if only I had, this, or, if we could go on a field trip and we had, I don't know what it is, but, we can collect these minerals and test it back. So, and so teachers put together these plans, but that's where, I used the word constraint before. That's where those constraints really become apparent because you have a community, a classroom that's ready to learn. Kids are learning machines. They're always, you actually can't stop them from learning, to be honest, right? Yeah, but you can really lever them up and allow them to reach all kinds of things if you just have the right supports, in place at the right moment.
One of the magic sauces of the platform, what you're describing and what I've been describing, a local teacher or group of teachers has an idea, it's innovative, they want to enact it. And, one way to think about that as a crowdsourcing platform is they can put their idea up and then they can contact members of their community, which they do, and it happens and it's very supportive. But one of the magic sauces of your platform is that you also allow opportunities for much larger foundations or corporate givers to become connected with teachers in areas like Athens, Ohio, where that connection would never be possible but for your platform. How do you match make like that?
Yeah, and I'll just add a stat about that because the majority of funds for any given project on average come not only from outside that teacher's network, but actually from out of state.
Wow.
And it definitely includes large gifts from our corporate partners and foundation partners. But there's an interesting pattern where actually a lot of individuals also give to lots of different geographies, not just necessarily their neighborhood, although certainly that's a part of what drives people to give. And one of the things that we work on, to your question of how to create these matches, is through the platform, allowing the different dimensions that people are naturally connected to come through and be super easy, hopefully super, super easy. So I'll give you an example. I mean, one is, yes, people like to give to the school in their neighborhood. That makes sense. Or where their kids go, or where their friends' kids go, or where their daughter teaches, although that may start to bring you to a different geography, right? Folks often give to their hometowns or to their newly adopted towns, or someplace where they have some other relevance. But also, we've got a bunch of music lovers on the platform, right? Donors for whom music has been a really important part of their life and an important part of their schooling. By the way, there's a lot of research behind this.
Yeah.
And so if they see an opportunity to support a new, class, a school band or orchestra that's being built, they'll give to that on the basis of that thematic connection. Same thing with arts or sports or science or math or any of these other themes. And for our corporate partners, often they're thinking about lots of different dimensions. There are a lot of companies that are really interested in making sure that kids are exposed to the technical, skills that are going to be necessary. And so again, those cut across geography and reach every community, whether rural or urban or, in every state. And so it's those dimensions that we try to make apparent and easy to use on the platform, so that whatever it is that is really inspiring a donor to give, they have access to it on DonorsChoose.
One of the things that I was reading, so first of all, I should sort of button this up and tell listeners and viewers, if you've not been on the platform for a while, or if your experience is you go on and you support a project and you go off, go on and spend time searching for your interests in the keywords and see what teachers are asking for that's connected to your interests. I found that fascinating. I spent a good hour yesterday when I was preparing to talk to you today, just doing searches for things that I'm interested in. And it's enlightening and also, I think, heartfelt to see that there are teachers around the country that have similar interests and are trying to do projects. And so I would encourage people to do that. I noticed when I was looking around on the platform that in addition to being, your core mission of providing resources to teachers, that you're also as an organization, trying to use that platform as a way of being an advocate, whether that be to districts, to localities, to state, lawmakers. How is that evolving for DonorsChoose, and how does that fit into your mission?
Yeah, that's a great point. First of all, I'm glad that sort of called out to you, because it is something that we're working on. And there are a few different ways that we're seeking to be that sort of advocate for students and teachers. One comes a bit naturally out of this scale that we have. There are lots of different ways of describing DonorsChoose. Sometimes it's definitely a crowdfunding platform. We're an education nonprofit focused on making sure that kids really have the opportunity to learn up to their potential. We're also, I think arguably, I would certainly argue it, the best distribution platform to public school teachers in the country. And we're also a place where it's literally true that every single day, teachers from around the country are coming to write, you've seen some of this, and describe something that they're seeing in their classroom, a challenge that they are facing, their thoughts about how they're going to do it, and actually listing what they need. One thing that I'll mention that may not be apparent at first about our model, and this distinguishes us from a lot of other crowdfunding platforms, is when teachers create their requests on DonorsChoose, they describe the problem, they describe what they're going to do, but also they list the actual resources that they need. In fact, the teacher experience includes a little bit of an online shopping experience where they put together a cart from our different vendor partners. And so we don't send cash to the teacher, but we actually we purchase the materials and send it to the school. That contributes to our trust model, by the way, because then as a donor, you can see literally to the penny exactly where everything went, and it went to the school district. That we sent a note to the principal. That it became district property, right? So it's really secure and transparent in that way. But I'm sort of highlighting these details about teachers coming on and describing in the text and and our access to knowing what resources they're requesting, because that's a lot of data that we have every day. It's sort of this real-time look at what's going on with teachers. So one of the things that we try to do is we try to be a responsible kind of megaphone for teacher voice. And some of that is just, we have a research and insights team that regularly is looking through the database of requests and pulling out trends, and maybe sometimes some early trends, and then making them available. We post on LinkedIn, we produce reports, we share them. So that's one way that we're seeking to be an advocate. Really, ideally, it's as true to actually what teachers are saying as possible, because we're basing it on what we're hearing directly from teachers. We also do regular surveys with our teacher community where we can probe on specific questions and bring that to light. And then over the last few years, in part because of work that started during the pandemic and in the recovery of the pandemic, we've been working with state level governments. So that includes state departments of education, state level departments of education, some governors, some state legislators, to use the platform to fund teachers' requests within their own, jurisdiction, within their own states. And actually, those partnerships have been incredibly fruitful. They've enabled us to reach even more teachers. It's been one of the biggest sources of growth for us in terms of new teachers and new classrooms that we can reach. But also, then we get a ton of data about what that state is interested in. And we can bring, and it's a part of how we work with them. We bring all those data right back up to either the leaders in the ed department or the legislators, so that they have access to it as well. And again, our goal there is to be hopefully a really effective window into the aggregated needs of teachers.
It's really interesting the way you describe that, because obviously data is driving so much right now. And what's interesting about your organization and the data that you would bring to those conversations is that it is sort of a combination of the grassroots up visibility, but then being able to decipher that. And I think that's a different type of data than you would get maybe from some other state government sources that, still would be illuminating. But the fact that you can show data of what teachers are actually saying, here's what I see and what I think my students need, that's really actionable. And kudos to you for being able to provide that type of information to people that can, maybe affect change on different levels within state jurisdictions. I want to stick on this thread just for a second. The organization has been around since 2000. As you look back, what are some of the things that have remained sort of consistent and invariant that teachers continually ask for that hasn't changed since 2000?
Yeah. We do regular kind of analyses of the categories that are of resources that are ascendant and not ascendant. Things come and go. There are some things that change. There are definitely some things that don't change. I'll give you one example of a consistent theme, really from the beginning, and I think from maybe the very first project, which is teachers are always interested in books that speak to their kids. The more, the better. And there are so many different uses for bringing in books, classroom libraries. I think the listeners will know, but maybe it's just worth pointing out that for the most part, when you become a teacher, you don't come into a classroom with a rich library in that classroom. Typically, the school will have a library, and that's great. And librarians are some of the most important educators that we have. And in addition to that, often it's really helpful to have something more specific. I'll just give like one specific example because it may stretch what people might be imagining. I visited a math classroom. So I was a math teacher, a middle school math teacher, and then a high school math teacher. So, I always love visiting a math classroom. And this was a really amazing middle school math classroom. It was focused on the needs of English language learners. So these were native, mostly Spanish speakers, but, and I walked into the classroom and, the way that I would describe it is that it was really working because I walked in and the kids were sitting together and they were engaged in what, technically we might call mathematical discourse, like working with each other on how to solve the problem and kind of debating what to do, etc. And I just was really marveling at it because this teacher was so effective. And, I talked to him about what he used DonorsChoose for. This is a math classroom. He pointed out, I actually got, well, first of all, this cabinet from DonorsChoose, the furniture itself. But then we opened it up, and inside were a bunch of graphic novels, just like rows and rows and rows and rows of graphic novels. I was like, that's interesting. So your kids like these? And what he described is, yes, my kids love these graphic novels. They are actually a help to bridge their continued language learning, right? These are multilingual kids that are learning yet another language, and this is helps them to acquire language skills. And they're a great reward, and they're incredibly motivating. So he works them into his math lessons, or he has that as sort of a reward for kids that are doing really well, and it's just part of his functioning, educational ecosystem. So that's a use of books that, again, maybe stretches what people might naturally think about, but people are always looking for books.
Yeah. I know that my daughter and her friends, books were a big part of what they did on the platform. Let me switch gears and ask the opposite side of that question. So, the 10,000-pound elephant / gorilla in the room for educators right now is AI. And I'm sure that, you've seen your team has been able to track the rise of educational technology in general as being an ask on the platform. Yeah. What have you seen most recently about artificial intelligence? Because, artificial intelligence is sticky. I mean, it's something that everyone needs to be cognizant of right now. It's also different from, the example you were using of the drones in some sense. Obviously, they would have AI as part of them, but it's not a thing. It's, it's something that you access on the. So it's just so different. It is. What are you seeing teachers asking for that's related to AI?
Yeah. So this is something that it won't surprise your listeners to know we've been really curious about. We get asked about it all the time. We were curious ourselves. I was curious as an individual. And also, I'll say, there's some amount of worry, concern that I have about the appropriate use of AI. Certainly I'm aware, as I think most of us are, that there are some significant risks, just in general, but also in the sphere of the classroom in particular. It's easy to imagine how these tools might really shortcut in the most negative way the normal ways in which kids learn, right? I mean, kids, in fact, everybody learns through productive struggle, right? That's how we all learn. Working on something, wrestling with it, failing, but being safe enough and supported to keep moving on. And then with each one of those, tries, you get a little bit of new knowledge. So kids learn through productive struggle. If these tools are used to shortcut struggle, then there's no learning.
Yeah.
So that is a real concern. And so actually we had those concerns and concerns about cheating and concerns about AI safety when we went into sort of digging into our own data. I still have those concerns, but we were really excited to also see some interesting bright spots coming out of the data. And so I would say the direct answer to your question is, one, we are seeing, not surprisingly, that requests that relate to AI in some way on our platform are dramatically increasing, like by 200% from last year to this year. And I'm sure it'll be another 200% increase, next year. So this kind of exponential growth. By the way, we're using AI tools ourselves to do this. So that there's a meta point there, maybe, but to do this analysis. But so it's growing. And we went into these projects to try to figure out, well, what are people doing? And they fall into a couple of different categories, but the majority, and by majority, I mean 70%, 71% actually. So 70% of the requests that we were looking at actually related to some form of meeting the diverse needs of diverse learners. So examples of that include, I was just giving an example of, multilingual language learners, translation tools, translation software, translation hardware, translation pens are really interesting because it gets back to, almost the same thing that I was talking about before, ways of creating bridges and connections to better reach students. Teachers are using translation to talk to their kids' families. So, that's a category. For students with special needs, and individualized education plans. Some of your listeners may know that acronym that people use, IEPs. But so there are a lot of teachers that are really leaning into the ability to differentiate curricula. For example, there's a request for a software license for a tool called TeachShare on our, that I saw on a platform, where this is a tool, a piece of software that is focused on curriculum, and the teacher was using it to take a piece of curriculum and differentiate it and address the lots of different needs so that the kids could have a unified experience, but it'd be tailored to individual needs. And so when we round that up, that's actually the majority of the use cases, and that we thought was really heartening, and something that we are looking more into to see how we can best support that.
It's really fascinating because, the teachers that I'm close to, K-12, I mean, this isn't so much in college, though arguably it should be, they work so hard on their lesson plans, and then they think, okay, there's those 5 students in my classroom each period that this lesson plan is not going to work for them.
Yeah.
And the ability for them to use tools like that to think about ways that they can alter what it is that they're presenting to the majority of the class, but maybe through something creative, like a graphic novel, like you were talking about with the math class, or, that's really available right now through AI. And I think what you're saying is really interesting, that teachers are using that as a solution to the fact that they have different types of learners in their classroom. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. I always feel like I'm holding 2 different realities in my head, and I'm an optimistic person, but I think I'm also a realistic person. And so we're very aware of, disparities in access, for example, that exist. I mean, we see that all the time. We see the real challenges. And, we are talking with our teacher community, other education partners about some of the risks that I mentioned about these new technologies and how they can be misused, because it's a powerful tool. It's all about the use, right? And so those are very real. And it's also just objectively true that we've never been better positioned to meet the needs of every kid than we are today, right? Like, these tools are so powerful. We have only more and more ability, if we decide to marshal our attention and use it in the tools in that way, actually an incredible amount of potential to meet the needs of every single kid, no matter what their need is. So that's a point of optimism, because that's true, right? We're positioned, and it just comes down to a decision about what we do.
Yeah, I love the way that you sort of reconcile those two different perspectives into one and still arrive at an optimistic outcome. I think that, the way you articulated that, the hope is that while these meta discussions are going on at this broad societal level, or even just in the education sector itself, the classroom teachers are figuring out the right things to do.
They are.
That have the best impact.
Yeah, that's right. I'll give you a little inside baseball. We're a nonprofit. We have a board. We have a mission statement. We actually, literally 2 days ago, had a board meeting where we updated our mission to, I won't give you the full text, but we sort of doubled down on our intention and really our commitment to providing educators with what they need to allow kids to learn, grow, and thrive. And we have some board members who are classroom teachers, right? Like active classroom teachers. And I remember one of them said, when we were talking about this mission, my eye went immediately to these 3 words: learn, grow, and thrive, because that represents literally exactly what I and my colleagues are trying to do every day.
Yeah.
And the other board member, who was a teacher, jumped in and said, actually, I was going to say the same thing. Those 3 words. And again, I started off thanking your daughter, because she's part of this group of people who really are going in every single day, and this is what they're focused on. They're using whatever's available to them. Hopefully we can make more and more available to them to try to solve these challenges. And so there is so much wisdom in what teachers are doing that we can draw insight from.
I think the last question I want to ask, you brought this up before, but you personally have a background where you've been an advocate for equity, and the platform itself, obviously, because it is crowdsourcing, is an equalizer for teachers to be able to get their message out and to get help. How do you see that continuing to evolve? Because even as the platform is doing, yeoman's work and helping teachers, we know that those equity gaps from one school district, even in the same community to another, and across the country, those gaps still exist, especially when you're talking about something as advanced as integrating AI and that sort of thing. How do you continue to evolve as an organization to try to, optimistically, you want to remove all equity differences? That's never going to happen, but you still fight the good fight. How do you keep doing that?
Scott, never say never. This is a great question, because, I'm glad I mentioned updating our mission, because that was also part of our updated mission, where the last part of it is that we focus first where needs are the greatest.
Oh, that's great.
And we serve all public schools, in fact, almost every public school. So we are trying to get to every public school. That is that is part of our mission. And within this broad range, we think it's really important to place a focus on where the needs are greatest first, because the footing is not the same across across the country. And so we use what we know about individual schools, and actually, whether they're in a rural place, income, race, special education status. We use subgroup information that is demographic information about kids, and focus on where the schools that have been historically underfunded. And these are things that we know and that we can see, and serve all public schools, but also put, like for example, on our platform, there's an ability to search and highlight the schools that have been historically underfunded. And we run campaigns, for example, with our corporate partners, to have an extra focus there. And so we serve all schools, and we try to focus where the needs are the greatest first.
It's been so wonderful to meet you and to hear more of the story behind DonorsChoose. I mean, as I said, it's a platform that I was already familiar with, but to hear you talk about it and to know the thought that your organization is putting into supporting teachers in various ways is just heartening. And more power to you.
Thank you.
It's just
well,
wonderful.
Thanks for having me on your podcast and having a chance to share a little bit about the work that we're doing. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. My guest today has been Alix Guerrier. He's the CEO of DonorsChoose. We will have a link to the DonorsChoose website in the text accompanying the podcast. And again, I would encourage all listeners and viewers to get onto the website and just explore it. It's fascinating to see what our friends and colleagues are asking for. I think that gives great awareness to sort of some of the things that are really important to students and teachers right now. Thank you all for listening and watching the podcast. If you have ideas, thoughts, or suggestions, simply reach out to us by emailing teachingmatterspodcast@ohio.edu, all lowercase and all one word. Thanks for your time today, and we hope everyone has a great day.